Welcome back to another episode of I Wish They Knew, a show where we share big ideas that deserve more attention in about the time it takes to enjoy a cup of coffee. I'm Joe Hirsch. Today's wish comes from Dr. Cassie Holmes. Cassie is a chaired professor at UCLA's Anderson School of Management, where she is an award-winning teacher and researcher. Her class on applying the science of happiness to life design is one of the most popular classes in the business program, and she's the best-selling author of a great book, Happier Hour: How to Beat Distraction, Expand Your Time, and Focus on What Matters Most. Cassie, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Joe. I'm happy to be here.
We're happy you're here. So what do you wish more people knew?
I wish that more people knew that when it comes to this puzzle of time and happiness, it's not about how much time you have that contributes to your satisfaction in life. It's really about how you spend your time, both being intentional about what activities you spend on, as well as paying attention during those most important activities.
So for a lot of us out there just doesn't seem to be enough time to get it all in the course of a day. And in the research, it refers to this concept of time poverty, the
Yes.
idea that we just don't have enough time to do what we want. And it sure feels like we're broke all the time, especially when it comes to our own happiness. What's going on here?
Yeah, and it's so important because in my data, we find that among Americans, almost half of the population feels time poor, which is, as you said, that acute feeling of having too much to do and not enough time to do it. And the effects of that are really negative because research shows that when we feel time poor, it makes us less healthy, right? We're less likely to spend the time exercising. We delay going to the doctor. We eat fast food because it's fast, not because it's healthy. It makes us less nice. When we're in a rush, we're less likely to slow down and help others out. It makes us less confident in being able to achieve what we set out to do. And our data clearly shows that it makes us less happy because we feel more stressed, and that plays out to feeling less satisfied in our lives.
So it's not just about making better use of that time, but also being more intentional about how that time is being spent and what we're doing during that time. And the research that you lay out in the book makes it very clear that real happiness, these happier hours, they come from having a purpose. And
Yeah.
you say that discretionary time, whatever discretionary time that we have, when it is spent on meaningful activities, the things we like to do, the people whom we cherish, those are the happier hours. So how do we measure for that? How do we track that?
Yeah, and it's a really important question because for those of us who are time poor, sometimes the thought is like, oh, if only I had a whole lot more time, then I'd in fact be happier. And our research shows that's not the case. In fact, there's such thing as having too much time. We find that folks with more than, in our data set, more than approximately 5 hours of discretionary time in the day are less happy because they have a lack in a sense of purpose and they feel less productive. It's not about how much time you have or even how much time you spend on a particular activity that contributes to life satisfaction. It's really how you spend that time. So then the question is, well, what are those activities that are the most worthwhile, that are the most joyful? And one way to look at that, instead of relying on the averaging that research does across people, is to track your own time. And I have my students do this, and I have found myself that it's incredibly helpful. And what it is over the course of a week, writing down for each half hour what activity you're doing. And as importantly, rating on a 10-point scale coming out of that activity, how do you feel? How satisfied, fulfilled? And notably, this isn't me asking you in general, what are those activities, Joe, that make you feel happy? Because actually, we're quite bad at predicting our sources of happiness. But this is leading you to look at from your own experience and quantify. So I will admit it's quite tedious to track your time over the week, but it is so helpful because at the end of the week, you can look at your own data across all of your activities and look at what are those activities that brought the greatest joy and satisfaction for you? What are those that got the highest ratings? Also really helpful in that is you can see what are some commonalities across those activities that produce those highest ratings. You can also see just how much time you're spending on your various activities. And here there's some surprises. It's like, holy cow, I had no idea that I was spending that much time on X. For me, it's email. For my students, it's social media. But these are activities that for social media, for instance, that's an activity that my students are like, oh, that's my source of fun. Yet they look at their ratings, their own ratings, and they're like, actually, I
Yeah, I
felt
felt
pretty
terrible.
crappy. Yeah. And like when you see that much time is sort of sucked
Yeah.
up by it, then for those of us who are time poor, which again is so many, that's a fantastic opportunity to sort of reclaim those hours so that you can reallocate them towards those activities that really are true sources of fulfillment.
So, unless we track this and really quantify where we're spending the time and how we feel as we spend that time, we could be deluding ourselves into thinking that the things that we're doing that supposedly bring us satisfaction are actually drains on happiness. Is that where we're getting it wrong? We don't have a clear sense of what's really bringing us happiness unless we get down into the details.
Yeah, and there are surprises that come up. So, for instance, my students will identify watching TV at the end of the night, or at the end of the day. That's my relax time. That is where I feel really good. And then they see their ratings. That first half hour, sure, they are, they feel good. But hour 1, 2, 3, 4 into that session, they're not feeling so good. Or there might be those activities that they dread, like exercise. Ugh, it's such a chore. But then they see how they actually felt coming out of it. And not only did they feel really satisfied from the activity itself, but that mood carries over and influences subsequent activities. So there are these activities that get picked up as sort of surprises, as more or less enjoyable even than you might expect. But then you can also see sources of true joy. Social connection is something that in the research we identify time and time again. That's just so crucial to our happiness, our satisfaction in life. But what are those activities that actually make us feel connected? And that varies by individual. So you will see from your own ratings, like those social activities that actually made you feel really good versus those social activities that made you feel bad. And so you can pull out, again, these sources of joy so you can be much more intentional about when you do have some discretionary time, how do you spend it in the most worthwhile way?
Did you find in the research that there was a strong correlation between happiness and activities that were undertaken in service of others? And that specific form of meaning that comes in doing for another person than just doing for oneself?
Yeah, it's interesting because the answer for that is it absolutely depends on those activities that are for another. But I will say that those activities that make us feel connected, and sometimes that comes from doing something in the service of the other person is a source of satisfaction. But I will also say, sort of warning, is that when you do something for another person, if it's not appreciated, or actually if it feels like they're taking your time, or it can backfire and feel like a waste and produce some resentment. So I'll just say it's that real source of connection that will be the determinant of whether a socially motivated activity feels worthwhile or not.
Yeah, because you could do something that, on the one hand, seems like it's an action that is built around social connection, but you feel more impoverished as a result of doing it.
Yes.
So, what's striking to me in this book and in your work is all of the happiness that is available to us that we're failing to notice and failing to actualize. Talk about some of the ways where we can squeeze more happiness from our daily routines, the things that we can actually control.
One is understanding what really drives you. What is your purpose? What's that goal that you have, whether it's the work you do or just where you dedicate yourself? And so one of the exercises that I describe in the book is the 5 whys. And what it leads you to do is to ask yourself, why do you do what you do? And that first answer is very superficial and tends to be whether it's your job description or, your what other people describe you as doing. But then if you ask, well, why is that important to me? And then your answer for that, you ask, why is that important to me? And what that does is once you answer 5 layers of why, it really reveals what matters to you. What is your purpose? And the reason that's so important is because that not only can serve as a really useful filter for what activities you say yes to or no to, as in, does it serve your purpose? Does it ultimately truly matter to you and the goals that you have? But also what it does is even for those activities that aren't so fun, if they are something that contributes to you fulfilling your purpose and reaching your higher order goals, then all of a sudden it feels more worthwhile. So not so fun, but it's like, oh, it actually feels better because you know why you're doing it. And then those activities that are actually positive already, but when you see how crucial they are to living out your why, then they become just absolutely joyful. As I said at the outset, it's not just about being intentional about what you spend your time on, but it's also paying attention to those things that matter. What do we do to pay more attention? There's several things. You can turn routines into rituals. You can infuse some variety, but you can also count. You can, how many times left do you actually have to do that activity in the future? And so if you count how many times left you have to do that thing, whether it's, sitting at the table and having dinner with both kids at the table on a Wednesday night, or for me, I have shared this, which is a source of joy, is my coffee dates with my daughter. And this is something that we do every week. She is now 9 years old. And we've been doing it since she was 4. I can always already see those inklings where she wants to hang out with her friends, perhaps more than me. And then one day she's going to go off to college. And so having counted how many coffee dates we have together left, I realized it was like 36%, much less than half.
Wow.
Which is very motivating because what it does is it makes me intentional about carving out protecting time for our coffee dates, even in a crazy busy week. But it also makes me pay attention. I put my phone away. That to-do list that is always running in my mind, I quiet it because this is the time that matters. And so being very clear, what are those times that matter to you, to fully show up, make the time for it, and to show up, be in it while it's happening.
Yeah, those happier hours, they come from counting the time, but also making time count.
Absolutely.
The book is Happier Hour, and the author, and I am so happy we had this conversation today,
Thank
is
you.
Cassie Holmes. Cassie, thank you for sharing your wish with us today.
Thank you so much.